start every episode by saying I'm so excited for today's guest, but this conversation has been, I don't know, 6 or 8 months in the making. And so I am like jazzed. I'll say jazzed today. I am really excited to have this conversation today. It's such an important conversation. I have Neelu here with us. I'm going to let her go ahead and introduce herself to y'all before we dive in and talk about really important work that affects how we navigate the world at work and just in life. So, Neelu, how about you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. And before I do, Jessica, I just want to say, like, you are one of the most flexible people because we've both had to reschedule numerous times. So I really
We have.
appreciate that. So I'm Neelu Kaur. I'm based in New York City. I'm an author, speaker, and executive coach. And I really focus on innovation by way of self-advocacy. So I talk about self-advocacy through the lens of individuals and organizations, and also organizationally, like what organizations can do from a culture perspective to create safety, psychological safety, where everyone feels seen, heard, and able to speak up and share their shiny, bright new ideas, because that's where innovation happens.
Oh, I love this so much. It parallels the work I do. We do it from very different lenses,
Yes.
but everyone I talk to in this sphere, I go, we need all of us, and we
Yeah.
need like thousands of others doing this work because it's so important. And I think right now, psychological safety feels like it's having its moment, which I absolutely love. I would be remiss if I didn't say, you can see it behind her too. She has this great book, Be Your Own Cheerleader, which I didn't put it in the script, but I'm probably going to ask her some questions on that too.
Yay.
Just because you wrote the book and it is such a good practical guide on how to navigate the workplace and self-advocacy for yourself. Let's start by you kind of did high level. What is your current work? Talk to me about why it's so important and needed in today's world.
Yes. So I can start with myself because that's usually how it all starts, right? So
Absolutely.
for me, one thing I noticed very earlier in my career, is that I kept getting fired and downsized. And I actually probably hold the record of the number of most firings or downsizings. And
Oh
it's not
no.
it's not because I'm not smart and creative and innovative. It's literally, I think it took me years to figure out the reason was because I did not know how to advocate for my ideas. I did not know how to jump back into conversations. I did not know how to take credit for my work when others were taking credit for my work. And so it just led me down this path of like trying to understand what was going on. And it's through all of these years of exploration, research, education, working in different organizations, I realized like there are a lot of people that struggle with self-advocacy. And so I don't just look at it through a cultural lens. I look at it through, there's a lot of people that struggle for a variety of reasons. And that's why it's so important to me.
Yeah. And you're right. It is a lot of different groups for a lot of different reasons. I love in your book because I think we're kind of at this moment societally right now where we're trying to find out how to be both a we and an I.
Mm.
And you speak to that in your book because you speak about your background in a lot of cultures focus
Hmm.
on the we and self-sacrifice the I, right? And
Hmm.
I sometimes feel like Western culture sacrifices the we for the I. And so
Hmm.
I'm curious your thoughts on how those two, because I believe I know, and the research shows, and our brain, how we're wired, shows that we need both of those pieces. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that too.
Yeah, I don't like to think of it as an either or. I think both and I think there are certain cultures, especially the culture that I come from and that my family comes from. I'm Indian, and it's a very collective culture, which is very we based, right? And so that means that other cultures like Latin cultures, African cultures, Arab cultures, Asian cultures are very we based, where it's all about group harmony. And then there's North America and certain European nations, which are countries which are about individualism and really promoting the I. And I think in an organization, if we just look through the lens of being a professional in corporate America in the US, I think it needs to be both and, because you can be a part of a team, but you really need to be apart from the team in order to get the recognition, to get the promotions, to get the raises. So I like to think of it as, an ideal state for me would be both and collectivism and individualism, and that we take the beauty of both and incorporate that into the organizations that we work in.
Yes. I love both and. That is the world we need to live in, both and. On
Yes.
many fronts,
On
many
many
fronts.
fronts. On many
On
fronts.
many fronts. So what do you see as the opportunities or possibilities for change in this space?
I think it's like, where do I begin? I think from an organization and culture perspective, it's like you might be a leader in an organization and you're just moving along, doing your thing, and you don't realize that there's people around you that are fearful for a variety of reasons because of power distance, right? So it's like being cognizant and aware of some of these intercultural dimensions and also just like, oh, noticing what's going on in the room and then bringing and looping people into the conversation. And then as individuals, it's like learning the skills and the tools and the techniques to speak up, to share your ideas, to sort of flex in the environment that you're in. So one of the things that I think is interesting is I've gotten, after my book was published, many people were like, well, it sounds like you're just promoting one or the other. And I think it's really about, or they're basically saying, it's like we're not authentic to who we are if we're doing something we're not comfortable doing. So if you're in a we culture, you're from a we culture, it's like coming into an I culture, you don't feel comfortable promoting yourself or advocating for yourself or speaking up. And it's like, no, it's contextual. You are still you, you're still the beauty of who you are. And you are essentially, it's a dial. And I think of it as a speedometer in a car where it's like, there's the we side and the I side. If you're in a performance review conversation, that's really when you have to turn up the I, right? And if you're in a team huddle, you're turning up the we. So it's contextual, it's situational, you're still authentic to who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I love that you touched on the authenticity piece of it, because a lot of times in the work I do, there's that same piece. Like, companies and cultures tend to think we want people to blend in, to mix in, to become a part of that culture. But when we do that, we lose a lot of our individual perspective and the gifts and the light and the talent and the stories that not everyone else there has. So I love thinking about it in that harmony. And you're right. There are situations um, where we need to be more one or the other, depending on what the goal and outcome of that situation is supposed to be, right? Right. It all
Absolutely.
comes down to what is the outcome, or what is the purpose of this interaction. Okay, now does that need to be more from the we or the I side of things?
Absolutely. So contextual, and you're still authentic to who you are, which is important. It's important for all of us.
Yeah. Okay, so my favorite question, and why I even have these conversations, is really, what is, or what could our world look like if we all understood this, if we all were advocating for both ourselves and for the collective? Like, what could the world look like that it doesn't look like now?
I think it would look like it's no longer an act of courage. It is just culture. It's by default. Like everyone feels safe to speak up. Every organization creates a space where people can speak up and share their ideas. So it's not something that is a huge courageous act, but that it's a cultural norm. That for me is the ideal. And I hope
What
it doesn't take till 2050, because I did look at your
I
future
know.
pacing and I was like, oh my God, first of all, I'm going to be super old. I hope I'm like in organizations at that time. But interestingly, I do think, it's going to be just embedded in the framework of every system. So not just organizationally with corporate America, but in the healthcare system, in all of the systems that we live in, is that it's just something that is embedded in the system where
Yeah.
everyone can speak up and share what they need to share in a safe space.
What does that get us?
Well,
What are the benefits of that? Yeah.
yeah, from a systems space, we look at systems creating. Let's see, from a systems space, we look at it from people speaking up and not just being another number, which is what happens in large organizations, whether that's the healthcare system, whether that's organizations that you work in, right? And then from an individual perspective, it's like, I have the skills to speak up so I can advocate for my ideas and get those promotions and raises. And collectively, it's just less volatile, less hostile, less toxic. And I think one of the things that we're seeing over the course of time is like there have been history, like periods in history where it's like, oh, people are leaving their jobs during the pandemic because they're burned out or whatnot. And it's like, no, we will escape all of that if we create these spaces where people can speak up when they're burned out. They can
Right.
ask for support, right? Like, so those things I think about a lot in terms of what does it look like beyond just corporate America? It's just like from a world perspective and from a systems perspective, every system treats a person like an actual individual.
Okay. I know I love this, and this is very much aligned with the world I try to create. My happy little world over here with happy leadership, and it is about the systems and the processes, right? It takes
Mhm.
it from being the way I like to think about it is it takes it from being, yes, it's self advocacy, and that's super important. But if I am advocating for myself in a culture that is not psychologically safe, it doesn't do anyone any good, right? So there's
Mhm.
both pieces of it. We have to build the systems and processes
Right.
that champion and and allow for people to show up as they need to, as their best selves, to contribute in the ways that are meaningful for them.
And to feel safe to push back,
Yeah.
right? Like when you have a deference for authority, like there's certain cultures that have a higher power distance, and so you're fearful to speak up. But in that fear lies some huge aha moments or some huge innovative creative ideas for organizations. So it's like breaking down those barriers is so important from a cultural and a systemic perspective.
Can you give an example of just because I think it's easy for people to wrap their heads around, like an actual example of what has changed for a person when they've spoken up, or how has a company changed when people have been enabled to speak up?
Well, if self advocacy may seem because it's like got self in it and it seems very individual, but it's actually the most generous collective act because you're essentially leaving a trail behind you of everyone that looks like you to, they may be 5 years behind you, they may be 10 years behind you. So I think if you are the courageous person that's speaking up in maybe the culture that's not as safe to speak up, you're essentially leaving a trail behind you. So when one person does it, it enables so many people around. It's kind of like a lighthouse. When a lighthouse illuminates a light, there's so many people, there's so much peripheral light that's coming. And I think when you are advocating for yourself in these systems and organizations, when you're speaking up, when you're sharing the concerns that you have, or you're sharing that you need assistance because you're overworked or that you're a single mom or you're all of these things that happen, you're essentially having that lighthouse effect where there's people around you that are going to be right behind you and they need that support. So I think when someone feels safe to speak up, it's not just about that person, it's about everyone that's around them.
Yeah. What about, because my story has me speaking up in multiple junctures in my life and being shown the door because of it.
Me
So
too.
what about that narrative? Because
Yeah.
I think that's a very strong narrative, especially when it comes to women who start
Mhm.
using their voice in maybe male dominated industries or cultures.
I actually had an instance once where I can't even believe we're talking about this, but there was this time when I worked at this large consulting company, and the partner of the organization that I was in within this company, he was having an affair. And I actually saw him out with the mistress, if you will. And
Yeah.
they knew that I saw them. So guess who got fired 2 days later? Me.
Yeah.
And it's not because I was gossiping or speaking up. It was just fear based that, oh, she
Right.
knows and she's going to say something. So I didn't even speak up in that moment and I didn't feel like it's my responsibility. It's a personal choice you're doing. Like it has nothing to do with me. And I was fired. So
Yeah.
interestingly enough, like I've noticed that I'm usually the person that speaks up on behalf of others, and then I'm the one that gets let go,
Yes.
right? So I think if you are that person and you're in those toxic environments where that happens, it's to reassess like what kind of organizations do you really want to work in and go find and seek out the organizations that don't do that because they are out there. And then
Yeah.
if you feel like there's practicalities too, right? Like at that time, I had no responsibilities other than taking care of myself. So I could afford to be out of work for a while. But let's say you're a single mom and you have 2 children and you can't afford to lose your job. It's sort of that mindset of like, okay, I'm going in for this set period of time to do this set thing and I'm exiting, which doesn't feel good, and just knowing that there's a time stamp associated with it. So maybe you tell yourself, I have to be in this organization for a year or 2 years and then I'm out. It's not an ideal, but it's practical, and we all have to be
Right.
practical at times as well.
Right. Well, and it goes back to what we spoke about earlier in that if you know the end goal or the outcome that you're working toward, and sometimes it is the paycheck is the end goal or outcome
Right,
during different phases of our lives,
right.
and And so knowing what that is and building your strategy around that, right? Um,
Absolutely. It's like having that future focus where you're like, okay, I'm not happy in this situation. It's a toxic environment, but there's an exit strategy and you're working towards that exit strategy. And I
yeah.
think that gives people hope instead of despair when they're in those
Oh, I
situations.
agree. And we need. I mean, I talk about optimism is one of the skills of happiness. We need to practice optimism, and that's a way of doing it. Is to say this is for a certain phase of time to address X, Y, and Z that I need to do. It's not forever. There's something better waiting for me. I'm building toward it. But if we just stay stuck and don't do the mental or the hard work of changing the mindset and of strategizing in this way, then we don't have the hope pulling us forward.
Yeah, and I also think it's a mindset, right? Like in the moment when I got fired from that position because of what had happened, I
Yeah.
for a few hours I went into victim mode and I was like, how could this happen? And this always happens and blah blah blah. And it's like when I flipped the script and said, this is not a healthy environment for me and I really want to go search for something else, it actually allowed me to feel more empowered that, this was what the universe needed to happen in order for me to move on. And like it was like an abrupt stop to something that needed to be, I needed to be out of that organization anyways. This was just sort of like pushing me out, and that's okay.
Yeah. I had this conversation yesterday with someone where I said, you don't always realize it in the moment you lose your job, whether it's a layoff or you're fired or whatever it is. You don't always realize it. But looking back, you almost always say, that was not a good fit for me anyway.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
right? Like I've been through multiple layoffs. I've been
Mhm.
shown the door for standing up for myself and other people. And in each of those, I can look back and go, yeah, that wasn't where I was supposed to be. It wasn't
Absolutely.
obvious at the time.
I was
Uh,
so I talk about this in many of my talks, that in 2013 was my last big downsizing, and I was escorted out by a security guard. And I was mortified first because I felt like a criminal, but also
right.
in the moment, I was just so devastated. I lost a job. It was like a very high paying job. And it was just like, I was so devastated. But now in hindsight, it is the best thing that could have happened to me.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
never, sometimes the clarity doesn't happen in the moment. It's only when you're a little bit out, like you're sort of removed, there's emotional distance from the experience and you're like, okay, I understand that this needed to
Yeah.
happen in order for me to become the person that I've become.
Yeah. So the other interesting story I've seen a lot, and I've actually lived as well, but I was talking to someone about this last week, is the person who stays
Mhm.
knowing it's toxic, but they stay to be the advocate for other people.
Mm.
So the woman I was talking with last week, she is over this job. She's not being treated right. She knows all these things,
Mhm.
but she won't walk away because she has a team there, and she
Mm.
is the protector of the team. Which is kind of, it's the we, it's collective.
Yeah.
It's kind of self-sacrificing the I. But what, knowing that this is your work and your world and it's about being psychologically, like creating those environments that are psychologically safe, what if you are the psychologically safe space? How do you navigate that?
So I really go back to, and we've all heard this analogy. It's like, you're on a plane, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can help anyone else. And if the situation is so toxic for this person that it's affecting her, I would suggest, like, okay, those folks will figure out their way as well, but you can't help them until you help yourself. So is this
Yeah.
toxic environment impacting your own personal mental health? And if that's the case, then it's bye-bye. But
Right.
if it's not, if you're like, you know what, no, I can tolerate it. I find positive moments in this. I'm helping this team. I'm pushing forward, and you get momentum with that, great. But if it's really
Yeah.
impacting you as an individual and your health and your mental well-being, it's a no-brainer for me to be like, this is
Yeah.
just not the right situation.
Same. Same. But I also like what you said earlier, and I'm thinking back as I asked that question. Like, when you do put yourself, like protect yourself in those situations and say enough is enough, I'm not sacrificing my mental health and well-being for
Hmm.
this, then you become the light that
Yeah.
shows others that they don't have to stay to, right?
Exactly. And you're, yeah, you're the lighthouse. And
Right.
your light has illuminated to these folks, and they start doubting and questioning, like, do I belong here? Is there another place for me? And maybe you go to a great organization and you bring your team along
Right.
slowly,
Right.
because that happens too.
Happens all the time.
It happens
Happens all
all
the
the
time.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So how do we get from today to that future space where there are psychologically safe environments where people feel safe using their voice and advocating for themselves and their teams? How do we get there?
Yeah, like let's look at it from a systems perspective and an individual perspective. And they're meeting at the same bus stop, which is where everyone has the skills to speak up. They know how to jump in back into conversations. They have the tools and the techniques. And then organizationally, you've created structures and culture where everyone feels safe to speak up. I think meeting at that bus stop is really important. And the way it starts is for organizations to realize there's a gap. And I think a lot of times you're just in business as usual operation mode. Like, we just have to keep things, the lights on, especially in the environment that we're in currently. It's like the focus is just about keeping the lights on, and you don't think about these things. But there will be a time very soon, I believe, where we're past this hurdle of just keeping lights on, and it's not just about surviving, it's really about thriving for some of these organizations. AI is taking over in a way that we would have never imagined, and so it's basically vetting out organizations that can't keep up from a competitive edge perspective. So when organizations fall to, some of them fall to the wayside, others are still thriving, and they're not going to be able to thrive until they are really looking at who's in the organization, what are the roles, who's doing what, how do these people feel safe to speak up. So I think it's meeting at each other's bus stop, but it's a two end process where it's, we can't just think about the individual, we really have to think about the system that they're in as well.
Yeah. So what are some practical strategies that that can be implemented both on that systemic level and on the individual level?
So, from an individual level, I feel like it's pretty straightforward. It's like, okay, understanding where you may struggle and reaching out to get the support. So, from an organizational perspective, maybe it's continuing ed stipends, it's getting some additional education, maybe it's learning and development courses that you can offer. Maybe it's asynchronous learning in organizations where it's like you have a cohort experience, right? And so you're putting people, moving them through these cohorts where they're learning these skills, learning these techniques. And then I think from an organization perspective, what we can start to do is for leaders to be aware that there are gaps. Like, I was just speaking at an association where it's executive technologist. And when I was sharing some of the reasons why their people struggle with speaking up, they were like, we never even heard of this. We didn't know about these intercultural dimensions. So it's like, once you are aware that this is the case, then you can change your behavior. But until there's a level of awareness, you're not going to know why there's people that are just, lurking in the background, just doing their work and thinking their work will speak for itself. So I think the
Right.
first step is really raising it to our conscious mind that, hey, there are people out there that aren't just like us. Like, a lot of the executives in the room were tall white men, and they assumed that everyone has these same type of experiences and privileges. And so when they became aware, it's not that they weren't the most compassionate people. I actually had some of them come up to me afterwards, and they're like, you just turned on this light for me. Like, I had no idea. And now it makes so much sense because, as you know, in the tech field, like, there's so many people that come from so many different cultures, and
Yeah.
self-advocacy and self-promotion is not there. It's not a muscle that they flexed. And so you have to be the leader that likes, like, hey, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm going to bring you into this sales call, or I'm going to hand the mic over to you. I'm going to
Right.
do these things, and I'm going to make sure you get the skills to learn the techniques that you need to learn.
Right. I speak a lot about, it is a leader's job. It is our job as leaders to set everyone on our team up for success. And we
Absolutely.
can't set other people up for success if we're not willing to be curious about who they are and what beliefs and systems they're bringing to the conversation.
Right. Because we
We make
ourselves are a system,
right,
right?
right. And I think as you're talking about this, yes, culturally, I see there is probably a huge dissonance between the people who are running companies and the people who are doing a lot of the work, especially in fields like tech. But I even think, for most of my life, I was told to be an extrovert. And it wasn't until COVID when I realized I was actually an introvert, and it changed everything. But that is a different way of showing up in the office space. It's almost like you
Mhm.
have to be an extrovert a lot of times to get the recognition, and it's really hard for introverts or, brains that work differently. I work a lot with ADHD people because I have ADHD. Uh, you know, when your brain is wired differently, a lot of times you're oblivious to some of the norms that are expected of you in workplace culture. And so, a lot of times, and I agree with what you said, people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
People don't understand experiences that aren't theirs. It's why, one of the pillars and skills I teach is curiosity,
Hmm.
because a lot of times we go into assumption and judgment, not in a mean, vindictive way, but because that's what our brains do when we don't know. We just assume everyone's like us.
Right.
And
Right.
curiosity is what allows us to ask the questions and go, "You're doing great work. Why do you never speak up? Can you talk to me about that so I can set you up for success here?"
Right, right. And again, it's not just cultural. You could be neurodivergent and you went through school where you were just trying to stay in the background because you felt different.
Right?
You could be extremely introverted. You could come from a military background where it's all about the team and the group, and that's how you're conditioned. You
Right.
could come from a small town in the US where it's like be humble. Don't promote yourself. Don't be like cocky, right? And it's like
Right.
so there's all these things. So it's not just so when I get in a room with execs who are say American or they just say, "Oh, we didn't even think this was a thing." So I think raising awareness is the first thing cuz like you said you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. Okay, so before we wrap this very insightful conversation, what is one thing, two things, however many you want to do? What are some ways that people can right now leave this conversation and just because it's over your shoulder behind you? What are some ways people can start being their own cheerleader
Mhm.
or start that stepping into this space of self advocacy?
I think practice makes progress. So practice in places where it doesn't feel as dangerous. So if you feel uncomfortable to do this in a performance review or in your team meeting, do it at home where you're with your family, your partner. Maybe it's safer to do it there or in your friend group. Like practice so that it's not such a heavy lift when you get into those situations where it is really like, oh my God, I'm viscerally uncomfortable to talk about myself. So I think practice everywhere because I think once you practice this thing, it's like going to the gym and then immediately lifting like a 40-pound dumbbell. You're not going to be able to do that. You have to work your way up and you want to practice and work your way up in safer environments. I think the other thing to think about is when you are doing this and you are currently, it's an act of courage to do this, you again are leaving a trail behind you. So it may feel very selfish, but when I think you do that reframe in your mind that, hey, this actually isn't just about me, it's about everyone behind me that looks like me, I think that changes the narrative. It turns on a different switch in our brain. And it's like, I'm not being selfish. I'm actually doing this for the collective good.
Those are both such powerful, like little steps that we can take and we can start living today. I love that practice makes progress.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I practice most conversations multiple times in my head.
Oh, that's another great tip. That's another great tip. It's like prepare before you go into these high stakes conversations. Prepare, record yourself, see how
Yeah.
you sound, watch yourself. Like these are things that rehearsal, if it is such a feels viscerally uncomfortable, rehearsal is
Mhm.
a great way.
Yeah. I do neighborhood walks and I'm just like practicing what I'm going to say before I go
Right.
into my next thing. Right.
Right.
So I love that. And I love practicing with people you're safe with.
Yeah.
And asking for what you need in safer situations as a way of one, it's a confidence builder, right? Like I've done it before and I survived. I can do the next thing, right? It gives
Right.
our brain all the hits and signals that allow us to step further and further into that space.
Yeah.
So those are great. So everyone, go out, start practicing, be your own cheerleader, and let's start using our voice and start advocating for the kind of world and spaces that we want for ourselves and for one another. Because as we've heard time and time again here, like we are the lighthouses for everyone behind us.
Hmm.
um, and there's a great responsibility with that, but there's such power in that as well, and I think we forget how much power we have in how we can change the way our world works.
I
Um,
couldn't echo that better than you did. I think walking away from this conversation, if you could walk away and think of yourself as a lighthouse, I think that's the most beautiful metaphor about how we want to impact the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so
Yes,
glad we
thank you so
finally
much.
got this
Yes, me too. Thank you
recorded.
so much.
It has been a pleasure, and everyone go get her book. You have some talks online too, don't you? I
Yes.
feel like I've seen.
Well, if you go to
Yes.
my website, you can
Okay.
check everything out, neelukaur.com. And then LinkedIn is my most active platform. So if you
Okay.
want to ask any questions, I will respond as soon as I can.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today, Neelu.
Thank you
I
for
really
having
appreciate
me.
it.
Me
All
too.
right.
Thank you so much.